Russian military threatens war on Europe, and the Kremlin's top propagandist claims that Donald Trump will take part of European lands. Is this true, and how to fight Russian fakes? We are talking about all this right now. Hello everyone, and welcome to YouTube channel War and Politics. My name is Sofia Trushchuk, and it's my pleasure to introduce our guest. It's Dietmar Pichler, disinformation analyst from Austria. Dietmar, hi, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, hello everybody, and thanks for having me.
So we will review some videos with statements by Russian officials and propagandists and discuss them. And I suggest starting with this. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova tried to downplay the significance of the pro-Ukrainian summit attended by EU leaders in London. So let's watch.
On March 2nd, the so-called European summit was held in London with the participation of the leaders of 14 countries: Great Britain, Germany, Denmark, Spain, Italy, Canada, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland. Do not be surprised that Canada was there, although the summit is European. Everything is mixed up in this very Euro-Atlantic home. Norway, Poland, Romania, Finland, France, Czech Republic, Sweden. Also, a representative of the European Commission, the head of the European Commission and the European Union, and the Secretary-General of NATO. The absence of out-of-the-way Russophobes from the Baltic states was striking. It seems they only invited those who are still able to shell out for the needs of this scammer from Bankover Street. And the Baltic countries have not produced anything for many years and are not able to give anything. In order to somehow influence this situation, the meeting in London, although planned in advance, but ironically, after Zelensky's fiasco at the White House meeting, it seems that for him, it became a consolatory gathering of supporters of unconditional support for the Kiev regime. As they say, now it is support for the Kiev regime to the last Ukrainian.
So how does this downplaying affect EU residents? Do they say that Europe will not be able to fight without the US, or are they more optimistic?
So I think the particular example that we saw is especially for the Russian domestic audience, because they need to downplay this, the fact that Europe is quite united, which is remarkable because Europe is not always united, but right now it is. She mentioned that the Baltic states were not present, which I would criticize, but it doesn't change the fact that there are a lot of countries that were present, and that the Baltic states are, of course, on board when it's about supporting Ukraine. And I think the Western audience will, most likely, not many people will see these statements, except in some cases what the Russian Federation is doing. They are sending their propaganda via TASS or RIA Novosti, and then it can reach mainstream media for Western audience. And this is, of course, a problem if there is no context given, if the journalists do not explain that it's propaganda.
Meanwhile, Russia's top propagandist Vladimir Solovyov is threatening Europe with a war that Donald Trump will start. So let's watch this video too.
I will love to watch Trump go to war with Europe. That it will end with the rejection of Greenland, the collapse of NATO, the collapse of the European Union. He will cease to recognize the European Union. There will be an economic war between America and Europe. And I still do not rule out that military assistance is now frozen for Ukraine. And then they will say, don't we want to enter into a system of military technical relations with Russia? This is where America's main enemies are. America's main enemies are satanic Europe and the European Union. Here they are, lying vile creatures, as Trump already hinted at yesterday. And he will say, I have nothing to share with Russia. He will say, I am just as slandered by the liberal democratic scum as Russia.
So terrible. Have you heard these narratives? And in your opinion, why are the Russians now spreading such propaganda?
I think the biggest problem that we have for many years, I mean, since 2014, but especially since 2022, is that the European and Western public and also the media does not monitor Russian domestic propaganda. Because if we would listen to what Solovyov and Simonian and all these warmongers say, and also these so-called experts who are invited, then we would understand how the imperialist and aggressive regime of Russia works and what their intentions are. And so Solovyov explains his mind. He recently also said that Russia should annex the Baltic countries and Central Asia and Armenia. They are very angry with Armenia because Armenia drifts away from Russian orbit. And so we see all this imperialism, but only when we decide to look at it. And the big problem is that Western journalists and Western media and Western audiences are not aware. They don't even know who Solovyov is. And I think we should monitor this propaganda, because when you think about RT and Sputnik News, these international outlets, they tell completely different stories than what they tell to their domestic audience, to the Russians, which is a genocidal daily propaganda. We also saw in Russian TV when they ask for drowning Ukrainian kids and other terrible things.
And the Russian Major General and war criminal Abdi Alaudinov says that Russia should begin mass mobilization in case of war with Europe. Let's watch.
We must already think, if such a situation arises, about a general mobilization, to gather an army of about a couple of million, put them all in a position from which they will never come out after that. Never. Either they shut up, or they actually lose even what they have. And after they want to clash with us, Europe and most of the European states will cease to exist as such. And the NATO bloc will fall apart anyway, because America no longer needs it. They do not need a war with us.
How widespread are such narratives now in European news and social media?
So this statement is not widespread at all, but I think indeed it is aimed to create fear, to create a certain kind of European opinion, to appease Russia, to give them what they want, because we don't want the nuclear war and all these things. And this unfortunately works very well. And I think it is possible that this message is for an international audience. It's just not, it was obviously not so successful. So I didn't see it in the talking points recently.
How is Europe currently fighting Russian propaganda, and what methods are most effective?
Yeah, it's not a success story, unfortunately. We should do a lot more, because the problem that we have all around Europe, but especially in Central Europe, in countries like Germany and Austria, but also in other countries, is that we think that Russian propaganda or Russian influence campaign, foreign interference campaigns are just a social media thing. And this is why I was digging a little bit into history, and actually the problem is the Russian interference, it works the same way as it worked during the Soviet times. So they use agent of influence, they use academics and people at university that try to convince you that the Russians are right and that the NATO enlargement is to blame, and all these narratives. And they use so many offline things, and then they record this and they spread it, of course, online. But when we speak about Russian interference, we speak only about troll farms, and we speak about these doppelganger websites, but not about all these other ways of influence. And you ask me about the videos and the statements. And yes, unfortunately, they come into mainstream media without context, and even in very reliable media, suddenly you see Russian talking points. And this is a little bit all around Europe a taboo, because because people are afraid to criticize real people, to criticize professors. Yeah? I mean, take a look at this big campaign, what we see with the recent recording of Jeffrey Sachs in the European Parliament. He was invited by a very, very problematic, in my opinion, very problematic political party, and he was spreading all the talking points about that Maidan was organized by the Americans, that people at Maidan were paid, that NATO expansion is to blame. And what he didn't speak about was Russian imperialism and the genocidal campaign by Russian officials and propagandists. So you see very one-sided propagandistic, in my opinion, view. And this is in the EU Parliament, not on social media. And I think this is what we should focus on. And if you ask me about countries who really failed, and I would say my country and the whole German-speaking world, and also other countries in Europe, we are all we fail to recognize how complex and how developed and how many shades this Russian propaganda and influence has. Unfortunately, it's also sometimes very subtle. Sometimes it's obvious and it's stupid and it doesn't work for many people. And sometimes it's so subtle that it works and goes into mainstream discourse.
And how do you think, will Russian propagandists try to fan the flames further against the backdrop of Donald Trump's unpleasant statements? Can Europe resist here in this sphere?
I remember in 2016 when Donald Trump became president of the United States, everybody in Western Europe who spoke about disinformation, the topic disinformation, only spoke about Donald Trump. And back then I criticized this because I said, I don't like what Trump says and I don't like what the MAGA movement does, but it is not affecting us in Europe as much as the Russian influence campaign, because we are not connected. And the Americans, they don't do this foreign interference. They tell these things only to their own people, yeah, the MAGA people, yeah, and the Trump campaign. But now, unfortunately, because we see Musk is communicating with Europe. He's promoting these far-right pro-Russian parties in Europe. So this is actually a problem. Huh? On the other hand, we see that the real Russian propaganda, so the Solovyov and all his friends, and also the Russian proxies that they have in the West, so Westerners who spread Russian propaganda, also, of course, exploit this situation with the recent Trump statements because it's very useful for them. Because suddenly you have, in the White House, you have obvious Russian narratives. I mean, if you call President Zelensky a dictator, if you say, or if you say that Ukraine wants the war or somebody else is responsible for the war except Russia, then this is Russian. These are clear Russian narratives. It's not even subtle. And it's really a big problem that we have this from all sides now.
I agree. I totally agree. So which lessons, in your opinion, should Europe learn from Ukraine in terms of dealing with both Russia and Russian propaganda?
First of all, we should learn to listen to the Ukrainians because they know what they are talking about, because of two reasons. Firstly, they have the historical experience, especially what happened and changed after 2014. And some Ukrainians say we had to learn it the hard way after 2014. Europe has to learn it faster, yeah? And they need to understand what happened to us. Yeah? I think that we can learn a lot from the Ukrainians because they have a lot of advantage in understanding Russian propaganda because of their own history. Yeah? And many Ukrainians tell me Europe has to learn fast because in our history, we had to learn it the hard way because of all the experiences we had with our imperialistic neighbor, and Europe needs to learn faster now, and they need to listen to us. Another advantage they have is that they understand the Russian language, which means they understand what is going on in Russia, what is the imperialistic mainstream there. for instance, to understand that it's not only Putin, that Putin has a lot of people who support him, that it's mainstream position in Russia, that all this, not only the servers, but also the people in social media, not everybody is paid. Many people contribute to this genocidal campaign against Ukraine. And then what I really like is that the Ukrainian civil society is very strong in battling the Russian propaganda. That there are a lot of journalists who put the finger directly where things are going on. And in Europe, we have this superficial thing, Russian propaganda is social media. And so, but the Ukrainians have a much broader view. They know how infiltrated a society can become with Russian spies and with agents of influence. And that is really great. And also that the government is having its own unit that is really determined to fight the Russian disinformation, and this is something quite unique. We don't have it the way the Ukrainians have it, and there should be a lot more collaboration, and we need to exchange also information internationally much more, which I also try to do with my Disinfo Resilience Network.
Indeed, it's very, very important to fight Russian propaganda. So thank you for this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
I hope it was useful for our viewers. If so, like and share this video, because information hygiene is an important method of fighting with Russian propaganda.